Hello class! We are now on our second week of module making, and for this week, we will be studying the third law of motion. This law is called the law of interaction. This lesson is inclined with the most essential learning competency, which aims to infer that when a body exerts a force on another, an equal amount of force is exerted back on it. So, in our lesson today, we will be looking at the two most important terminologies. These are the action and reaction. What are the expectations for this module making? Number 1, explain Newton's third law of motion. 2, explain why action and reaction forces do not cancel each other. And for the third one, cite application of Newton's third law of motion. It is important that all of you are familiar with this kind of law because we use this in our day-to-day lives. Aside from that, at the end of our lesson, I want all of you to be able to state the different laws of motion, not just the law of interaction. To begin with, I want you to open all your module to page 2 and answer pretest. Then after 5 minutes, proceed with looking back found on page 3. Let me read to you the instruction on how you will be able to answer the module. For pretest, reading the direction, read the questions carefully. Write the letter of the correct answer on the blank provided before the number. Since I already asked you to prepare your ISN/module notebook, you will be writing down your answers on the next page. Just write pretest and then the number of items and then write only your answer. So for pretest, you have 5 questions. Then immediately after that, proceed with looking back, and the same with this. For part A, directions, analyze the illustration and or scenarios in answering the questions on the right. Highlight the letter and corresponding statement of the best answer. So, for this activity, you will also write down your answer using your module notebook. So again, no one is allowed to write anything on your copy. All you have to do is to put your answer on your module notebook. So this includes page 3 of your copy. So this activity is good for 10 minutes and your time starts now. Time is up. Now let us check your work. Let me read to you the question and please put a check on your paper. For number 1, a construction worker exerts a force of 36 Newton on a wheelbarrow. How much force is in return does the wheelbarrow exert on the worker? Okay, correct. So that is also equivalent to the force exerted, which is letter C, 36 Newton. For number 2, a person on a skateboard pushes off the ground with their foot. This caused them to accelerate at a rate of 5 meters per second squared. If the person weighs 550 Newton with respect to gravity, how strong were they push off the ground? It will be the same amount of force. So the total amount of force would be 550 Newton as well. So the answer for number 2 is D. Next, for number 3, a child pushes a book against a vertical wall. What are the action-reaction forces involved in the vertical plane y-axis of this process? Okay, so for the answer, that is letter A. Both I, applied force on the girl, of the girl on the book, and 2, applied force of the book to the girl. So, whenever the girl pushes the book will also exert the same amount of force to the girl. Maybe you were thinking, hindi naman gumagalaw yung book, di ba? But that is what action-reaction is all about. The force you exert on a particular object will give you the same amount of force backward. Then, for number 4, car A, having a mass of 450 kg, was involved in a collision accident with car B, which had a mass of 650 kg. What could be said about the force experienced by car with the higher mass with respect to the lighter car? Okay, the answer is letter A. Both cars experience the same amount of force. Even if the other car is lighter compared with the other one, the force they exerted with each other are always equal. Okay, and then for the last question, number 5, which best describes the statement of Newton's third law of motion? Okay, letter D. The magnitude of forces in an action-reaction are equal but in opposite directions. So kindly count all your correct answers. Then write it down on the side of your paper with the total number of items, which is 5. Good job. Now let us proceed with the looking back. For number 1, which of these will make a coin fall straight into the glass without the latter moving? Okay, letter C, abruptly pulling the cardboard. Kapag flinik mo yung cardboard ng biglaan, tatalsik yung cardboard and then mahuhulog po yung coin sa loob ng baso. Kapag hinipan ba natin yung yung coin, malalaglag ba siya sa loob ng glass? No. Kapag dahan-dahan nating pinul yung yung cardboard, hindi rin kasi masasama yung coin doon sa cardboard. And then the last one, flipping the cardboard. Kapag binaliktad natin, okay, may tendency na mahulog yung coin pero sa labas ng baso. So, pinaka-appropriate na answer for that would be letter C. So, biglaan mong pitikin or bigla mong hatakin yung cardboard. Then, mahulog po yung coin. Okay, for number 2, the answer will be letter A. If the net external force acting on an object is 0. So, like what I have discussed with you in our previous video lesson, I told you that based on Isaac Newton's statement, when the forces are having a 0 net force, then the object is in complete stop. Nakahinto po siya. So, the answer for number 1 is number 2 is A. And then, what did you do with part B? Did you draw them? Or just assign the color? If you have written the color on your module, then that would be accepted. Knowing that you are not allowed to use your module in answering. So, if you also do a drawing of 3 boxes and then shade the colors on each boxes, that will also be accepted, provided that you have the correct answer. Let us have the first scenario. So, a car passenger is thrown forward when the car suddenly stops. Tumalsik. Yes, that is inertia. So, that should be colored with green. What about the second one? A sepak takraw ball movement depends upon the players hitting it. Kapag malakas yung pagsipa niya, ano mangyayari doon sa movement ng bola? Okay. Magkakaroon din siya ng greater acceleration. Kapag hininaan yung pagsipa, edi mahina din yung acceleration. That is what we learned in our second law of motion, which is the law of acceleration. So the answer for the second scenario would be yellow, acceleration. And as for the last one, a stationary car may accelerate with respect to the force and mass of the two men pushing it. So as you can see, a car is a heavy object. So it takes two persons for the car to be pushed. So with a greater mass, you need to apply a greater force enabled for the car to accelerate. So therefore, number 3 or the third scenario would be yellow, acceleration. So looking back is also equivalent to 5 points. Kindly write down your score and then write the total number of items, which is over 5. You did it great. Now, let us look at this situation. We have here a sumo wrestling. Are you familiar with that kind of a sport? That is one of the sports in Japan. As you strike and crush at each other, it is no doubt that you feel a force. But also think about your opponent, yung kalaban mo, which feels something. For when they apply force towards you, the same goes for you applying force on them. In other words, there is a pair of forces involved in the sports of sumo. So, if one wrestler will push the other wrestler, for them to be able to hold each other on the same position, the other one should also exert the same amount of force. For us to completely understand this concept, let us take a look at these two types of forces. Number 1 is the contact force. When you say contact forces where objects touch or contact with each other. So, meron silang direct na contact sa isa't isa. Magkadikit sila. And these are divided into 4 different kinds. So, number 1 is the applied force. Applied, a force given to a person or object by another person or object. Its symbol is F, depending on who or what applies force on the object. If a boy applies a force on the wall, we denote it with F boy. So, naka-subscript. Subscript. Then, refer to the figure below. Looking at the person in figure 8, applied force of a boy towards the wall. So, since the boy is pushing the wall, the boy is exerting force on the wall. But did the wall move? No. That is because the wall is also exerting the same amount of force towards the boy. So, if you're going to look at them, the forces applied by the boy is towards the wall, while the wall will push the boy on the opposite direction, making them both stays the same. So, walang nagkakaroon ng changes sa movement nila because they are in equal position. The second kind of contact force is friction. If the force acting against or opposite an object in contact with which makes the movement of an object slows down, friction always opposes the motion of an object. So that is the reason why when a ball is rolling, it will eventually stop. Because friction is the one who opposes. Siya yung nagpapahinto doon sa object na yon. Its symbol is written as F subscript F. Air resistance, denoted by F air, is an example of frictional force. Yes, ang hangin po, isang uri din niya ng friction. So, it is the reason why air against a flying kite, airplanes, parachutes, or those in skydiving sports have been able to maintain their flight. For free-falling objects, this force is always considered negligible, meaning the magnitude is unnoticeable. So, itong forces na to, hindi natin siya nakikita. But, there are some kind of phenomena na nangyayari na in between those objects. So, looking at this, figure 9, frictional force or F sub F acts opposite on the force applied. So, if you're going to look closely, the directions are still in opposite. So, the force applied on the box, using the floor, on the floor, is going to the right, while the frictional force is going to the left. So, that opposite pa rin ang directions nila. The next one is the normal force. Normal is the force that acts perpendicular to the surface of the object in contact with. Its symbol is Fn. So, this one denotes the vertical type of forces. One acts in an upward direction while the other one acts on a downward direction. So, yung upward, that is called as the normal force, and then yung downward naman, that is the weight, or also known as gravitational force. Then, the last one is tension force. Tension is the force applied to string, rope, chain, or cable. Anything na nakasabit. Its symbol is letter T. So, let's say we have here a pendulum. So, nakahang siya gamit yung thread or yung rope o string. So, regardless kung ano man ang ginamit sa kanya. And then, nakakonect siya sa ceiling. So, yung tension niya will be upward. Correct. So, the tensional force or simply tension T that acts on the rope of a hanging ball. So, let's say, yung mga ano natin, mga light bulb na nakasabit sa sa kisame natin, o hindi naman kaya pati yung yung wall clock na nakasabit sa pader. Kahit na yan ay nasa gilid, as long as ito ay nakasabit, that is called as a tension force. Okay, so the second type of force is the non-contact force. Forces where objects do not touch or contact with each other. So, sila yung mga klase ng forces na kahit na hindi magkadikit, they are still acting upon each other. So, these forces act over a zone or area called field. So, there are two kinds of non-contact forces. The first one is the gravitational with a symbol of Fg. Is the force of attraction between two objects. In the case of the Earth, this gravitational force causes objects to fall down. Kaya nga kahit na anong tapon natin sa object pataas, it will eventually go down because of gravity. Okay. And then, it makes satellite and smaller objects stay in orbit near the more massive planets. Mass and distance of the two objects affect the gravitational force that holds them. The bigger the masses of the objects are, the bigger is the gravitational force between them. So, if we are going to compare our mass here on our planet Earth, it will be greater as compared with on the moon. So, once you go to the moon, since the size of the moon is 6 times smaller than the Earth, then your weight there will be divided into 6. So, eventually, you will become lighter on that heavenly body. Kasi the larger the object is, the greater its gravitational force. So, eventually, kung malaki ang Jupiter, alam naman natin na yan yung largest planet. So, makakatayo ka ba doon? Hindi. Baka nga ma-deform pa yung katawan mo pagkapalapit ka na sa kanya dahil sa sobrang lakas ng kanyang gravitational force. What about if you're going to the Mercury? So, eventually, dahil iba rin yung size ng planet na yon, magkakaroon din ng change sa iyong weight. Tandaan na, the greater the mass, the greater its gravitational force. So, yung mga planets na mas malalaki, mas greater yung forces, gravitational force na meron sila as compared with the smaller ones. Okay? And then, the closer the objects are, the greater is the gravitational force between them. So, habang palapit ka ng palapit sa surface ng object na yon, pabilis din na pabilis ang iyong pagbagsak. The figure below illustrates gravitational force between the Earth and the Moon. Earth has bigger gravitational force over the Moon. So that's what is I explained a while ago. Okay. The second type of non-contact force is the magnetic force. These are forces exerted on a field of attraction or repulsion, as in the case of magnets and other magnetic materials. Magnets and magnetic materials have two poles, the north and the south poles. So, do you know which part of the magnet has the greatest amount of gravitation of magnetic force? Yes, these are the poles. So, attraction may occur when two poles are not the same, a positive and a negative, while repulsion takes place with the same poles, positive, positive, and negative, negative. Are you still familiar with the attraction and repulsion principles? Yes. So, when two poles of the same kind face each other, they will repel. So, let's say the positive and the positive side of the magnet is facing each other. Kahit na anong pilit nating pagdikitin yan, hindi talaga sila magdidikit. They will repel. But, if you're going to face the positive and the negative part or poles of the magnet, they will automatically be attracted. Yes, if you're going to recall our previous video lesson, we have already differentiated balanced from unbalanced forces. So, when we say balanced forces, it has two forces acting on a different direction. Its net force is always equivalent to 0, making the object at rest. So, nakahinto lang siya. But once we say the forces are unbalanced, the forces applied can also be opposite or the same, provided that the magnitudes or the net forces are not equal to 0. This makes the object moving. So again, balanced force is acting upon objects that are at rest, while unbalanced forces are acting upon objects that are in motion. So this gives us the idea about the third law of motion, which is the law of interaction. So for interaction, there should always be two objects. The one that gives the action, and the second one is the one that gives reaction. we may not be able to see it. Kasi hindi naman talaga natin nakikita itong mga forces na to by just looking around. But these objects exert force towards each other as they interact. As force is exerted by an object, action, there will be a reaction. Force applied back by other objects in contact. So whenever one gives an action, automatically there will be a reaction. So how can we observe this kind of phenomena? Let us have two examples. The first one is hammering a nail. Hammer exerts a force on the nail and drives it into the board. So once you hammer the nail on its head, the nail will pushes inside the wood or any type of object you are trying to hammer with. But do you know that before the nail is being pushed inside the wood or the material, it also exerts the same amount of force to the hammer? What? Yes, that happens. How? Newton reasoned that while the hammer exerts a force on the nail exerts a force on the hammer. So eventually, dahil greater ang force na ina-apply doon sa nail na yon, ganun din yung amount ng force na ibinabalik niya doon sa hammer. If you're going to look at them, they have an opposite direction. Yung hammer papunta sa baba, while the nail papunta naman sa taas. Pero ma'am, bakit nakita ko po nung pinako namin yung pako, lumubog yung pako? And that is because you are applying greater force on the nail. Okay? Next, sitting in a chair. Newton reasoned that while you are sitting on your chair, you are exerting a downward force while the chair exerts an upward force. Both exerts the same amount of forces so that you will not be able to fall down. So kahit na ang upuan ay walang buhay, nagbibigay pa rin siya ng force, nag-e-exert pa rin po siya ng force. At ano ang direction ng force ng upuan? Hindi po yan pababa. Kasi kung pababa yan, babagsak ka. Kasi yung force na ina-apply ng iyong paraan ng pag-upo ay pababa rin. So yung iyong pag-upo, pababa, and then yung chair mo naman, pataas. So anything that is in contact will give you the same or the equivalent amount of forces being exerted. But do note that the direction of forces will always be in opposite direction. Okay, so to test your knowledge about our lesson, let us have our module time. So for your module time, tonight, since I don't want you to use your time on other subjects just to finish the lessons you are intended to with our science, you need to do the following. Number 1, answer activity number 1. The title of the activity is Newton's third law of motion or the law of interaction. This is found in your copy of module on page 4 to 7. Then also, after answering that, answer also activity number 2, Newton's third law of motion. And then, all answers are to be written on your module. So, provide another sheet of paper and then write the title of activity 1 and then write down your answer and then activity 2 and then list down again your answer. And then after that, you take a picture of your answer and then send it to our Discord module channel. And then after answering your module, proceed with your ISN. So ISN time. For you to be able to do this, you need to go to page 8 and answer remember. So after answering remember, answer check your understanding and reflection. Pages 8 to 9. So, where are you going to write your answers? All answers are to be written on your student's interpretation part. So, let's say this is your big notebook. As you have learned when you were in grade 7, ISN is divided into two parts. The teacher's input found at the right side and the student's interpretation found at the left side. So, meron akong format na ibinigay na sa inyo in our previous video. So, nandoon na yung magiging format. Laging 6 yan sa taas. Title, we have the teacher's input number 1, title, and then date. Then dito rin sa taas, sa gilid niya, may nakalagay din dyan. Module 1, week 1, and then forces or physics atay nandoon. And then, meron po siyang margin sa magkabilang side. Kukopyahin nyo po yung nakalagay na format na ibinigay ko sa inyo before. And then, dito po, sa student's interpretation, ganun din ang gagawin. Kukopyahin nyo rin yung tatlong nakalagay dito. Pero this time, instead na teacher's input, ang nakalagay ay student's interpretation number 1. Right? The title, ano yung title niya? Nakalagay din dito yan. And then, date. Ngayong gabi. Kung kasi ngayong araw ninyo siya kailangan tapusin. And then, dito nyo po ilalagay ang sagot. So, itong remember at saka check your understanding and reflection should be written on your student's interpretation. So, ano ngayon ang magiging copy ng inyong teacher's input? Ito po yun. So, makikita nyo itong copy na to sa inyo ring mga module copies. So, kukopyahin nyo lang po lahat yan at nasa pinakababa po yung drawing. That's all. As simple as that. Okay? So, after doing or answering your module and your ISN, now, let us have the summary of our lesson with regards to the third law of motion, the law of interaction, or also known as the action-reaction. We have learned from this module that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Kung gaano kalaki ang force na in-apply mo sa iyong action, ganun din kalaki ang force na magiging reaction sa iyo. Hindi mo man nakikita itong forces na to, but they are existing. It can either be in contact forces or non-contact forces. So, the directions of these forces are always opposite, but their magnitudes are always equal. At this point in time, let us now summarize all the 3 different laws of motion stated by Sir Isaac Newton. Again, law of inertia states that an object at rest will remain at rest and an object in motion will remain in motion in a constant velocity unless acted upon by an outside force. So, yung object na nakahinto will remain na nakahinto. At yung object naman na gumagalaw ay mananatili rin silang gumagalaw. So, kailan lang natin mapapahinto ang gumagalaw at mapapagalaw ang nakahinto? Kapag meron pong outside force na nag-act upon sa kanila. Okay? Then, the second one is the law of acceleration. The law of acceleration states that the acceleration of an object is directly proportional to its net force and inversely proportional to its mass. So, meaning, kapag ang object ay inapplyan natin ng greater amount ng force, directly proportional siya sa acceleration. The greater the force, the greater its acceleration. The lesser the force, the lesser its acceleration. It is also inversely proportional to mass. If the mass is greater, the acceleration will become lesser. But if the object has a smaller or lesser mass, its acceleration will become greater. And for the last one, the law of interaction. The law of interaction states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law is also known as the action-reaction. So the forces applied to an object will always be on an opposite direction, but both of them are equal. Do you understand now the three laws of motion? I hope you do. So that ends our week 1 and week 2 lessons of module 1. So let us see what you have learned from our lesson by placing all your answers on our Discord channel regarding the different activities stated a while ago. Hope that you will submit all the requirements on time. Thank you. Goodbye.